What's up, everybody? Welcome into the All-22 podcast, the official podcast of the All-22 fantasy platform, the only fantasy football game with full 53-man rosters, including offensive linemen, where you get to choose personnel packages and have access to PFF grading and advanced stats to make decisions each week. Ray, it's been a big week. It's free agency week, a lot of moves happening, and we've been talking draft stuff basically nonstop, so it's good to maybe take a breath, pause for a second, and talk about something else. Why don't we spend today talking about some of the biggest moves at each position, and we'll talk about maybe which ones we think are positive, negative, our favorites, things like that. How's that sound?
Yeah, I love how this is like the official first day of actual free agency and not tampering. And free agency is like, it's not over. It's clearly not over, but the fireworks have already happened for the most part. It's like 85% completed already for like the actual, like true difference makers, especially on this platform. So, happy first day of free agency. Glad to talk about everything that's already happened in free agency.
What I think happens is like we talk about how I don't understand how people gamble on the NFL because of how scripted it is, right? And I just have this feeling, something tells me that the NFL knows all of the moves that are going to happen basically now until the draft, maybe a month ago, because what you're going to see is over the next few days, you're going to hear rumors, right? All of a sudden, free agency is over, and all of a sudden you're hearing, is Justin Jefferson getting traded? Is he going to the Falcons? And then you hear, some other crazy rumors, and it's just going to keep happening. And probably once a week, we'll have some major move that happens like that, where all of a sudden Justin Jefferson gets traded. All of a sudden, T. Higgins gets traded. All of a sudden, L'Jarius Sneed gets traded, right? They're going to save it. They're going to spread it out because I think it's all, I think at least the offseason is scripted, which is kind of fine. I mean, besides the fact that you can gamble on where people are going to go, like if you couldn't do that, it being scripted to me is like, that's okay.
Okay, I love a good conspiracy. I mean, the NFL, really has mastered the art of staying relevant 365 days a year. So I will never turn down a good conspiracy.
Cool. Let's start with the big ones, and it doesn't really get bigger than quarterback, right? Kirk Cousins going to the Atlanta Falcons. It's a big deal. Don't get me wrong. It is a big deal. But for Kirk Cousins himself in all-22 fantasy football, I don't know if it's really a game changer like it will be for the rest of the Falcons players, right? Like I think for Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan, huge. This is a massive move for them because they get a quarterback that, one, can get the ball to the receivers on time and accurately, and two, take a lot of pressure off the run game, right, with Bijan. So I think it's a huge advantage for those players. But for Kirk himself, right, he's losing Justin Jefferson, who's maybe the number one receiver in football. Jordan Addison's a very talented player in his own right? Last year, he lost Dalvin Cook. The offensive line's not that bad, right? You have Christian Darrisaw. So it's, to me, for Kirk, I don't really know if it's an upgrade.
No, for Kirk, I think it's neutral. It all depends really on how he's going to come back from the injury, if he's the same guy, same player, if he looks the same himself. I mean, this was a top 7 quarterback before he got hurt, right? I think we were discussing how not enough people were giving him his flowers for how well he was playing and how the situation around him necessarily didn't hold up. But he was doing his part and he was playing phenomenally. I don't see that level of play really getting much better just because of the new situation. I think it's more so, hey, he was a top 7 quarterback. If he is able to come back from this injury and be the same guy, he can also play at a top 7 level moving forward in Atlanta, but this doesn't take him from 7 to 3 so much as it allows guys like Kyle Pitts and Drake London to actually see quality targets now and be used the way that pretty much every football fan or not of the Falcons, has been dying to see.
Yeah, exactly. My buddy JP called out something that I think is important to talk about, which is they dumped Matt Ryan when he turned 36 years old, right? They dumped him. They said he's too old, he's done. Physically, he was, right? Like he was basically done. And they go sign Kirk Cousins to what is really a 2-year deal, but it's a 4-year deal. And essentially, he's 35 years old. He's coming off of a Achilles tear. Are we sure that Kirk is still the Kirk that he was the beginning of last year and the years prior, right? Like, is there any fear as a Falcons fan, which neither of us are, but is there a fear for them that like maybe this doesn't work out?
Sure, of course. It is Kirk Cousins. I mean, for all the great stuff that he does do, it's almost like you look back and you're like, well, it never really worked out. Like he plays well, but it still doesn't work out for his team. Now that he's coming off of an injury, it could still not work out. But I don't think they will turn away the opportunity for a young franchise quarterback should it arise in the draft, moving forward, so forth. I think this does not preclude them from doing that, although I don't think they're really going to have that opportunity because others are going to be more aggressive who have bigger needs at that spot as we get into the draft. So I don't think they're going to end up with one, but I don't think this precludes them from doing so because they know that that is a risk and a factor with Kirk Cousins.
Since we're talking about quarterbacks, a huge deal just happened. Right. I talked about this every day. The NFL knows how it's doing it. It's not as big of a deal as I'm making it out to be, but it's a pretty big deal. The Seahawks traded for Sam Howell.
Oh my God. Oh, that's the big deal.
Come on, that's a big deal. Sam Howell could end up being the starter.
May. It's a big deal for Drake May.
Or
Drake May.
Okay.
You know how awkward it was going to be for him to walk into that room like, hey, I'm replacing you again, buddy. Like, so yeah, they had to get rid of Hal. So that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's a nice move. Anyway, the other big move at quarterback was Baker re-signing with the Bucs. That's the only other big money deal. We're both Baker stans. We've made that very clear. So we're happy for him. But since he re-signed with the Bucs, I don't think there's much to talk about there. Where there is a lot to talk about is Russ to Pittsburgh, Minshew to Vegas, Brissett to New England, Darnold to Minnesota, and Locke to the Giants. Those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 quarterback moves that I actually think could have like starting impact, right? Like, I don't know if there's any of those 5 that you think are better than the other ones or ones that you're really excited about. The thing that I thought is like Minshew was born to be a Raider, right? Like if there was any quarterback made for a team, it's Minshew in Vegas. That one's a pretty cool matchup. I think his stock goes way up. Doesn't seem like, like he has this guaranteed starting spot there, but it's pretty likely that he's going to win. I mean, Minshew is a guy that anywhere he's gone and gotten starting games, he's basically raised the floor of the team significantly. So O'Connell did okay last year. Props to him. But to me, Minshew is a better player that likely will be the starting quarterback and a rosterable one in All-22.
You don't think there's any chance that this is a bluff or a move to gain leverage in Justin Fields negotiations?
No, I don't.
Like, hey, we don't need to trade for Justin Fields. We got Gardner Minshew. We got Justin Fields at home. Is this one of those? Is this one of those deals? Because I guess the subplot to all of these moves that we're discussing here is where does he end up? Where does he ultimately end up? That's still to be determined, right? And a lot of people, including us, mentioned Vegas as a destination. I'm not excited too much. I mean, I get the fit. I love the fun of it, the fun aspect of Minshew in Vegas. But it's one of those deals that is fun for about 5 weeks. And then everybody goes, okay, we really need a guy here. And that's pretty much Minshew's career. It's almost like without any numbers or data in front of me, it kind of feels like Ryan Fitzpatrick's career, right? Like everywhere Ryan Fitzpatrick goes, it's really fun for about 5 to 6 weeks. Whenever he somehow gets the opportunity to start and take over for a period of time, and Fitzmagic shows up and it's great, but it lasts a month. It never lasts a full year, let alone 2 years, right? The duration of Minshew's contract. So I still don't know if this precludes them from doing anything other than saying we don't have to give up X amount of draft capital in order to get Justin Fields. If the Bears are trying to play hardball, I also don't think that it's a guarantee that I'm not saying they're going to go get Justin Fields. I'm just using it as an example again of this doesn't preclude them from making a move for a younger or long-term quarterback, but it does allow them some breathing room so that they are not backed into a corner at quarterback for the time being if they can't get something done.
Yeah. So No, I don't think that Fields is going to Vegas. Recent rumors, and I think this is probably the most likely thing, is that teams are looking into getting him as a backup, right? Like that is still a domino to fall. Apparently, the Eagles have inquired about getting him. I think that's a great fit, and it makes sense, right? Like it makes sense. Fields, from a learning perspective, can go there, sit for a year behind Hurts, learn a little bit about the game, and then maybe get a starting job the next year, right? Which a lot of quarterbacks have done, right? We saw like Carson Wentz and Mitchell Trubisky and Sam Darnold and all these guys do it. Sam Darnold just got a starting job in Minnesota potentially, right? At least a transition one until they decide to start whatever rookie they draft. But, you know, I think there's three outcomes that could happen, and two are more likely than the third. But it's he either stays and he's the backup for the Bears, he gets traded to be a backup somewhere else, and the third, which is very unlikely, which, you know, I think people were talking about yesterday a little bit, is what if the Bears really weren't shopping him, right? And their plan is to just keep him as the starter. I don't think that's realistic. I
Don't
don't
listen
think
to
that's real.
Greg Gabriel. Don't listen to Greg Gabriel.
But I mean, it could happen. It could happen. I don't think it's likely, but it could happen. Are there any other of these quarterbacks that you're like? I think Russ, right? Like stock up to Russ because his stock couldn't really go any lower with what happened in Denver. Him going to Pittsburgh, Hall of Fame head coach, offensive line is improving, probably better weapons than what he had on the Broncos. Stock up for Russ. I think it's a good idea to keep him as your third quarterback. He's not like in the situation where you're dropping him at this point. And I'd probably keep him on because I think that the value would either continue to go up or it's going to zero out, right? And at this point, you're probably better off taking that chance than trading him for something that's really nothing.
Yeah, you're not going to get much for Russell Wilson in a trade in all-22. So for that, I keep him because you've seen the highs, even if we're a couple of years out from them now, probably maybe more than a couple at this point, pretty much before Denver. And so, you know, it's there. Might it be gone completely because of age? Sure, it's likely, but it's worth the last spot on your quarterback depth chart to find out and to have as a backup that can be put in the lineup in the event of an injury elsewhere. If you need him to start for a few weeks, at least you'll have an idea of what you're getting with Russell Wilson.
Right. And then the last one that I'm going to mention is Drew Lock. Stock up for Lock.
Of course
I'm not going to tell anybody to roster him, but just know that I will be just because I will never give up on Drew Lock. Let's go to
that's me with Sam Darnold. I'm just gonna say that's me with Sam Darnold. I've been waiting so long for Sam Darnold to not be in the worst possible situation of all time. First with the Jets, then with the Panthers, and then he's a backup over in San Fran. Now he's in Minnesota, and he might still end up being the backup because the same thing applies like the other stops here. He's not precluding them from doing anything at quarterback, but at least it's not the worst situation of all time. Hopefully Justin Jefferson doesn't leave, and the only other weapons he has is Jordan Addison and one-legged TJ Hawkinson. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, I'm keeping an eye on it.
Absolutely. Okay. Running back shakeup was crazy, right? I don't want to spend too much time on it because this is all 22. That's not what we're going to do. But Saquon to the Eagles, Jacobs to the Packers, Henry to the Ravens, Pollard to the Titans, Eckler to the Commanders, Swift to Chicago, Singletary to the Giants. Those are the ones that I think are massive impacts on fantasy and just in general. I mean, obviously to me, Saquon's stock way up. Jacobs, I'd say it's pretty sideways because he's going from a good offensive line situation to another good offensive line situation. Henry to the Ravens, probably stock up there. Way better situation in Baltimore, but he is older. Pollard to the Titans, stock way down, going from a good offensive line in Dallas to a bad one in the Titans. Eckler to the Commander, I'd say stock way down. He got a pretty poor deal. To me, he's on his last legs, but it's nice to know that he still wanted somewhere. Commanders did some weird stuff, adding a lot of older players. That was one of them. Swift to Chicago, I'd say that stock way down as well. The situation in Philly was amazing, right? Now he's going to Chicago. It will be worse. But he still has fantasy relevance, I'd say. And then Singletary, stock up. He was basically a stopgap starter for a little while in Houston, but he's going to the Giants to be an actual starter. So stock way up for him. What do you like?
For now? Yeah, Saquon Barkley was the big winner, right? Philadelphia was the number 3 overall run blocking team in 2023. The Giants were 30th, and I'm astounded they were that high. It was probably the highest they were in Saquon's entire career, just going offhand. I didn't look at the data, but we all know how bad, I'm just going to be nice, that offensive line has been Barkley's entire time in New York. So he finally gets out of there into a situation with a great line, even if they fall to say top 7 because of the retirement of Kelsey and I don't know, maybe Lane Johnson's a little older and so on and so forth. There's a little bit of change there, right? But still, way better than anything he's ever had in the NFL or college, if we're going to go back that far. So finally, now that he's been battered and bruised behind the worst situation of all time, he actually has a good situation in Philadelphia. Jalen Hurts with his own read game as well can help open some things up there. You mentioned the other winners too. People haven't spoken enough about how great Tony Pollard was in the second half of the year. I think it was a top 3 running back overall after like week 9 or something to that effect. And so to end up in Tennessee after that situation in Dallas, it's one of those deals where his value is very high for the last couple months. And if you didn't take advantage of that in any trades or anything like that, maybe you still start him because he's a good player. I don't see his value being as high ever again as it was 2 weeks ago. So those are my thoughts on running back. You kind of hit on all the others. Nothing else really to add there outside of that. But congratulations to Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, and the Titans situation might not end up being terrible depending on what they do in the draft. They added Lloyd Cushenberry. We'll get to that. They have Peter Skoronski. Maybe they go tackle in the first round, and all of a sudden that offensive line takes a pretty big step forward. We'll get to that.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get to that.
Receivers, very quiet. Not a lot going on. Pittman stays in Indy. But the 2 big moves, which are not that big really, it's Ridley to the Titans. Again, the Titans stock down in terms of Ridley's value in my eyes, right? But it's good for everybody else on the Titans. He was Trevor Lawrence's number 1 receiver. There's not many quarterbacks in the NFL as good as Trevor Lawrence. He goes to be Will Levis's number 2 receiver behind Hopkins. So to me, that's probably stock way down for him. But it is an interesting landing spot for him. And then Mooney to the Falcons. I'd say stock way up for him.
You're big on that move. Okay.
I don't like Darnell Mooney. I don't. But okay. Stock has to go way up, right? Because he was in Chicago, basically just not getting any real feed or anything like that. Goes to the Falcons where he gets to be this field stretcher, help open up that offense. Kirk Cousins likes receivers like that too, right? So like it is a good opportunity for him to get more action, more opportunity. And I don't think he's really a startable player right now, but to me, he wasn't even really a rosterable player before. So I think he at least made that jump.
I think he's on the border of being rosterable. But otherwise, yeah, Calvin Ridley, I just don't see Will Levis as a wide receiver friendly quarterback. So it's stock down, and he's going to be 30 years old now. So by the time maybe some material development occurs there, people are already looking for the next thing. So yeah, I would say stock down on Ridley's long-term value too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Tight end. Basically everybody re-signed with the team that had them before. There was nothing I had that I wanted to talk about here.
Nope.
Okay. Let's move on. Offensive tackle was fairly calm. So there's a few moves I want to talk about at tackle. We knew back with the Patriots, technically they're calling him a tackle. Stock probably down just because that situation just seems to have not gotten better at all. It's kind of, if anything, gotten a little bit worse. Hopefully after the draft, we're saying it's gotten better, but staying there, I think it's great for the Patriots. That's what we said they needed to do. Smart move, but for him, probably not the decision I would have wanted. Jonah Williams goes to the Cardinals. Stock down for him too. Basically hasn't proven that he's a fantasy relevant starter yet. And he goes from the Bengals, which is one of the best situations in football with Joe Burrow behind him, to the Cardinals with Kyler Murray. Running quarterbacks do make offensive linemen's jobs easier. But again, he just hasn't really proven himself. So to go from a good situation to a slightly less good one, to me, stock down. And then Jermaine Illuminor.
Yeah, Illuminor.
Yeah. To the Giants.
Lackawanna's finest, I think.
Yeah, pretty interesting move. Might be a guy to keep an eye on. He wasn't startable until maybe last year, had a pretty good year, goes to the Giants. Going to have an opportunity to play right tackle, I think, if they move Evan Neal inside, which I think is eventually what will happen. But if not, he is still this offensive lineman that can be moved like a chess piece. I think it's a really good move for the Giants. Curious how it affects Illuminor.
Yeah, this one, it's tough to make out because you just don't know exactly where he's going to end up. So it's more so, hey, here's a pretty talented player with some tools. He's 29 years old, but some linemen can go for until around age 33-ish or so before you really start to see a decline. So has a couple years left if you're really sort of scraping on the back end of your, let's just call it for now, offensive tackle rotation. It's worth keeping an eye on to see what they do with Neal and how his position ultimately shakes out. I wouldn't pencil him in as a projected starter in all-22 by any means, but just worth sort of keeping that eye on. That's all.
Mm-hmm. The interior of the offensive line is really what went crazy. Like, if there's anything that we should be talking about, that's it. And it really starts in Carolina. Carolina adds Robert Hunt for $100 million. And they also add Damian Lewis for, like 40 something million dollars. So they add two of our favorite guards in the NFL, period, but probably the two best guards in free agency. It's really hard to tell the impact that the change in scenery will have on those two guys. Robert Hunt goes from Miami to Carolina, Miami being one of the best offenses to play for. McDaniels is an absolute guru, schemes things up to make offensive linemen's jobs so easy. And he's going to Carolina, which is obviously in the past few years has been an absolute mess. But with the new coaching, we don't really know. Damian Lewis, same thing, right? Seattle, Pete Carroll, better offense, good situation. Going to Carolina, again, we don't really know. But I think that this has a huge impact on every player on that offense, right? Bryce Young gets protection, increases his stock, I'd say like tenfold, right? Where if I was basically quitting on Bryce Young before this, they just told me that they're willing to invest around him, protect him. They also added a receiver weapon. Like, I think they're doing everything they can possibly do, which we talked about this offseason. That wouldn't have been my strategy, right? If I was going to do anything, I probably would have just bet on my defense, got as much draft picks as I can, and built for the future, and just told Bryce he's got to figure it out. But doing it this way works too, right? This was
so unfair.
It's life, though. And this was your strategy, though, I think. Like, when we talked about this, it was build the offensive line, trade for some weapons around him, get rid of Brian Burns and get draft picks and other talented players, and just build the situation up for Bryce Young. That's what they're doing. Miles Sanders' stock should be up. Akeem Ekwonu's stock should be up, right? Like, everybody on this offense, stock way up.
Yeah, I had Saquon Barkley as my biggest just overall free agency winner. And right behind him is Bryce Young, because he finally gets some semblance of help and protection, especially right up the middle, right? Everybody talks about, well, his size. That was the real knock on him. Nobody doubted his ability as a playmaker, a play creator, and as a competent quarterback. But his size and how that fits in, especially for getting pressure up the middle, that's definitely where you don't want it to be if you're an undersized quarterback in a struggling offense. So to at least shore up the middle of that offensive line, huge stock up for Bryce Young, getting closer to a competent situation to see what he can do, what he's truly made of. So yeah, big stock up to Bryce Young in particular, and happy for the guards. It's a long time coming.
Absolutely. Like, value, the weight of the guard position is going to go up pretty tremendously this year, which is awesome. We talked about it last year with CJ Stroud. Like, they invested so heavily in the offensive line before his rookie season. And we said, like, that's how you do it. Like, that's how you make sure your quarterback has early success and finds his footing. They're trying to do that now for Bryce Young. I hope it's not too late. I don't think it will be. So I'm excited to see how that plays out. But the Rams also double dipped at guard. They brought back Kevin Dotson, who had his best season last year on the Rams after coming over, I think, from Pittsburgh, and then Jonah Jackson coming from the Lions. They added, again, two guards to that offensive line. I'd say stock way up for both of them because of what happened to Dotson going from the Steelers to the Rams, right? This is one of the best offensive systems in football. Sean McVay is going to make everybody's life easy. He's going to scheme things. He's going to do it right. I'd invest heavily in both of these guys.
I'm a little less optimistic about Jonah Jackson, only because I don't think Detroit was a bad spot either initially. So he's topped out sort of in the high 60s for 1 year, but has essentially been up and down. So if there was a spot for him to go, right, he wasn't going back to Detroit, then this was a landing spot that you would have preferred if you have him on your roster, if he's in your lineup. You wanted to see Jonah Jackson go somewhere like the Rams. I'm just not quite sure that it's going to result in a large increase in performance, only because I think he had it Detroit had it pretty well over there too for offensive linemen. So we'll see there. But yes, good to see Dotson in particular staying at a place of success and hoping to continue that moving forward, especially as that Rams roster just gets stronger, right? Because this was supposed to be the down period after they went all in for the Super Bowl a couple years ago and didn't have much draft capital moving forward, and maybe were brushing against the cap or what have you. They kind of weathered that storm pretty darn well. And so for only to have reinforcements come moving forward now and for him to stay in that situation, I think is a good thing for Dotson.
Agreed. Okay, we talked about Cushenberry from going from the Broncos to the Titans, so that's a good deal for them and get their center. So I like that. But let's jump to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive interior was another position that got absolutely paid, right? So the interior of the defensive line and the offensive line are the biggest winners from my perspective in free agency. Chris Jones gets that monster 5-year deal, $158 million. Justin Madubuike, 4 years, $98 million, and Christian Wilkins got 4 years, $110 million. He's the one that changed teams, so that's the one we're going to talk about, really, right? And I like the Raiders a lot for him. Obviously, again, Miami was a great situation, so it's not like the situation gets that much better. But I think the edge rusher that he's playing against, I don't think he's played with a talent like Mad Max Crosby. Probably the best pairing of Wilkins' career. Nick Chubb, Jalen Phillips, good players in their own right, but I think Max is pretty special.
Yeah, the thing about this is that Max Crosby was the most double-teamed edge rusher in the league, if I recall correctly. So for him to now have someone like Christian Wilkins along that same front, which he did not have before, that's a big win for Crosby. Takes some load off, and we know he plays a ton of snaps. He hates getting off the field. So that's a big win for Crosby. And again, like you said, I don't think the situation really improves much at all for Christian Wilkins, but Max Crosby is a big winner just to have a talent like that along that same front that he just hasn't had before. So he can't go much higher. He's already one of like the top, 3 or 4 edges in the game in all 22. So not much higher to go other than, however highly Christian Wilkins alongside of him can actually take him. So stock up for Max Crosby for however much higher it can actually go.
Yeah, and the other guy I had written down was just Leonard Williams going back to the Seahawks. We talked about him as a potential, guy that I would want if I was a couple of GMs, but he goes back to Seattle. I think that's a good deal for him. There were a bunch of other moves at defensive interior. We could talk about it all day, but those were the guys I wanted to really point out. Is there anybody else that you wanted to?
No, those are the big ones. A lot of the big signings, like we talked about, they kind of stayed put. It was more so a re-signing, which is great for them, right? You'd like to see that with Madubuike. Chris Jones, we know what he can do and what he means to that defense. So not much to discuss there.
Yeah. Okay. Edge had a few very big splashes, but interesting ones altogether, right? So Burns going to the Giants, they let Saquon leave. They made some kind of interesting signings, but the biggest move they made was the trade for Burns, which isn't, I guess, a free agency move, but we're going to talk about it anyway. I really like it all around. I think the Giants get a lot better. Him playing across from Kayvon Thibodeau with Dexter Lawrence on the inside, it's kind of that same thing, right? It's like Dexter Lawrence, I know that, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. The Panthers, Derek Brown is a really good player, but Dexter Lawrence is next level special, right? He was the best defensive interior in football last year. So Burns going to play with him and then having Thibodeau on the other side is pretty special. That could end up being a very, very good front. And I think that like the Panthers were kind of killing his morale, right? Like we talked about how he hasn't really played at this like elite level yet. Like he hasn't reached that next level, but he got $150+ million. So the Giants must think that he's capable of that, right? So you have to look at that and go, this is probably a situation where they're thinking we're going to get more out of him than what the Panthers got. But then just flipping that, right? People are kind of bashing the Panthers for trading Burns for less than what they had gotten offered the year before, right? They had apparently had offers from the Rams to get 2 first-round draft picks plus, and they end up trading them for essentially what they traded for Sam Darnold. What I would say to that is you really can't undo your sins. You really can't go back to the past. You can't undo somebody else's sins. I think it was a different GM at the time. And all of those things, and you did that move so that you can make Bryce Young's life better on the offense, right? You now have an extra second round pick that you're probably going to invest in the receiver position and hopefully make Bryce Young's situation better. I think, again, you can only really look forward and figure out how your go forward path is going to pan out. I kind of like it for them too.
Yeah, it had to be done. It wasn't going anywhere with Burns staying put in Carolina. It just wasn't going to work out. The timeline wasn't going to work for either side. So it was best to just get something done and get what you could. You can't look back. It's a sunk cost at this point for whatever you traded for whoever who's also no longer on the team. So don't even bother looking back. Just look ahead and make the move that needed to be made. And that's that's really all there is to it. There's no point in looking deeper into it because it's unproductive. And so for Burns now to go to New York, I think it's stock up, maybe not slightly, it's probably too weak of a word. It's decent stock up for him, but really all eyes now are on Kayvon Thibodeau, I think, moving forward here, because he hasn't exactly played up to snuff, at least in 2023. Wasn't a great year for him, but we know the Giants were lacking a pass rush on the other side there. I don't know why Google decided to chime in just now and interrupt me while I was talking about that. But in any event, I think all eyes now are on Kayvon Thibodeau. He had a promising rookie season, kind of really went crashing hard last year in 2023 as the 69th overall pass rusher in the league from the edge spot in 2023. So now that he's got someone across from him, we already know about the run stuffing they have up the middle and the quality of players they have on the interior of that defensive line. They invested in you. It's time. Year 3 breakout for Kayvon Thibodeau. It has to happen.
Yeah, and when I watched Kayvon, it was really like the pass rush wasn't necessarily a problem. I think he was okay there, but it was the run defense was not good, and it was pretty evident on film. I like the contrast that Burns maybe can bring to that. So I think it is a good pairing. I'm excited to see it. But the next one I wanted to talk about, I was going to put on you because Danielle Hunter is your boy, and he goes to the Texans. It seems like a match made in heaven, but I want to know your thoughts.
It is. He is my third biggest winner in all of free agency after Saquon and Bryce Young. So Danielle Hunter gets to play under DeMeco Ryans alongside Will Anderson Jr., right? That's phenomenal right off the bat. There's two really key stock up factors for any edge rusher looking for a landing spot, right? Last year in 2023, he had to play across from DJ Wanham at the other edge spot in Minnesota. He was a top 10 edge rusher. He, meaning Danielle Hunter, was a top 10 edge rusher in 2022 when Zadarius Smith was on the other side of him. Not so much in 2023 with DJ Wanham on a bad Vikings team that couldn't rush the passer as much because they weren't exactly scoring a ton of points and pinning their ears back on defense. However, he still was a top 20 pass rusher in 23 despite all of this, right? One key metric or statistic is that in 2022, he had roughly a 13% double team rate as an edge rusher. Remember, this was alongside or opposite of Zadarius Smith in Minnesota. In 2023, he faced double teams between 23 and 24% of the time as an edge rusher when rushing the passer. So almost double there, right? At least a 70% increase for math people out there. That's a huge difference. Now he gets to be alongside Will Anderson Jr. on an up-and-coming defense that has really quality players on all three levels, the front, second level, and the back end. So for the next 2 years, which is what you realistically look at his career runway, I can't think of a better landing spot than this. I'm a huge fan of how this played out for Danielle Hunter. Very excited for 24 and 25 and what he can bring to the table in that type of situation, because he has not been talked about enough for his performances the past couple of years. And I think now he kind of, is going to just burst through the door in a big way and make you talk about him.
Agreed. I would love to see them draft a defensive interior player now to really form that defensive front. That could be special. Bryce Huff goes to the Eagles. Another nice move, probably a lateral move for him just because he went from a very good situation to another very good situation. I don't think it's necessarily raising his stock, but it's good for the Eagles and the players around him. But moving to linebacker, it's been a very light market, right, for a couple of years now. And Patrick Queen is kind of the biggest splash, but it's not really that big. He goes to Pittsburgh in kind of a wild move, interdivision. It's probably a step down for him, though, right? You're going from the Ravens, which is one of the best defenses in the NFL, one of the best coach defenses in the NFL, and playing alongside another very talented linebacker, to Pittsburgh, which is kind of a defense that's aging very rapidly, hasn't really been able to replenish. And, I understand them wanting to get a leader in Patrick Queen, but he is still a young player that isn't fully formed yet. So I do worry that this is maybe going to be a difficult situation for him. Curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I have Patrick Queen as a loser because I'm not sure he's not a sound player. He's a splash player. You talked about the impact that Roquan Smith had on him in 2022 and 2023, pretty much from the instant that he was traded over to Baltimore. Patrick Queen was a bad player for the first 2 seasons of his career, almost 2.5, really, before Roquan Smith there. And pretty much everything changed at that point. I think he needs that presence alongside him of a sound, steady, but yet also impact linebacker in their own right alongside him. I don't think he can be relied on to be that guy. He's not that number one. He's the splash player that can feed off of the situation being steady around him. And I'm not sure that that's necessary. There's no Roquan Smith in Pittsburgh. I don't see that guy. It's not Cole Holcomb. We talk a lot about if you wanted to switch it up. There's the alarm. We had to switch it up a little bit and say, well, what about the defensive interiors in front of him, right? He had great interior line play ahead of him in Baltimore. And in Pittsburgh, we talk about Keanu Benton a lot. We love Keanu Benton. You should have drafted him if you listened to us in your rookie drafts last year. But he's not the type of guy that's just going to make life easy and plug up a ton of holes for his linebackers. He's just a good player in his own right. So I had Patrick Queen as a big loser in free agency. If others in your league don't see it that way, I might be making a move to see what I can get for Patrick Queen.
Yeah, sometimes just having a guy with his name in the news makes people want him. So it could be an opportunity to do that. Washington made a bunch of splashes, right? And I talked about how they added some older players. Frankie Louvu is not one of those. I think that's a pretty darn good signing. He was a very underrated player last year, was one of those players that you could kind of get on free agency, but he was an instant impact player on your team. And then they also had Bobby Wagner, who is the older player that they added there. Definitely not afraid of age, obviously, Washington, but I think they wanted to add leadership, right? And I think that's what they did on defense. I think it's a smart move for them to do that. I like it for Louvu. Again, that Panthers defense was kind of like had lost its soul a little bit. I think a lot of players were playing defeated. Louvu was maybe the only one, fighting day in and day out, keeping things alive. And Bobby Wagner, he was kind of thrown around the league a little bit last year, but he's going to bring that leadership. So I think for both of those guys, it's probably a good thing, although this team still desperately needs edge.
Yeah, they still do, even after signing someone like Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler. So, yeah, I think slight stock up for someone like Louvu in that sense. The situation is no longer horrible. So perhaps you look at the tangential benefits for someone like Emmanuel Forbes, who we discussed, needs a better situation or a good and steady situation to develop as a young player. Dan Quinn's the guy for that. So I think overall stock up in free agency and coaching changes for Emmanuel Forbes. Not going to get too far into it because he's not a free agent move or anything, but stock up there as a beneficiary of the moves that Washington has made this offseason.
Right. 2 other linebacker moves, just Josie Jewell to the Panthers, Blake Cashman to the Vikings. I think both of those are notable. They will impact, future things for your team. If they're players you have, you're definitely going to want to look into those. I think both of them are fine. I liked Blake Cashman in Texas, so I would have wanted him to stay there. But, the Vikings is a good situation. They are a well-coached team, so you don't hate it. Cornerback market has been extremely quiet. Another very, very quiet position. Jaylon Johnson gets a deal, but it's a lot smaller than what basically everyone had anticipated, right? He is the number 1 corner in this class of free agents and didn't crack the top 5 salaries at the corner position, which is usually not the case, right? It's usually that the top guy at least enters that realm, if not raises it. So thought that was pretty interesting. It's great that he stays in Chicago. They're making that situation better. They're obviously investing heavily to make the situation better. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for him. And then just Snead is stuck in Kansas City. there will likely be a trade coming soon, right? We talked about how it's fixed. It's probably they already know where he's going, but we'll see. And then Kenny Moore staying with the Colts. So again, like really nothing big happening there.
We could talk about how I cut Jaylon Johnson before the 2023 season because I got tired of him middling in the 60s and I had some other pretty good corners, and then this happened. So there's that's
Montez Sweat was
backfire
huge
there.
on him.
Yes. So all-time backfire move there. But otherwise, yeah, holding steady. Good for Jaylon Johnson. I mean, he's still getting life-changing money. And for Jaylon Johnson owners who held on to him, you know, this is good. You know, he's in an environment that he can obviously thrive in. So kudos.
Yeah. Safety market was pretty surprising. I don't think anybody really expected, Xavier McKinney to get as big of a deal as he did. But the Packers were pretty desperate at safety, and they have been for a few years. If you watched their playoff games, that was their biggest weakness, right? Like their safeties just continuously missed plays. They want a player like McKinney that's going to be a fighter, that's going to go in there and just be a big play guy, right? And also just a hard hitter, right? Like they needed a little bit of that. So I think it's definitely great for his stock as well, right? This is a player that was on Giants defense that definitely had a lot to be desired. So definitely stock up for him. Then Antonio Winfield Jr. and Kyle Duggar get franchise tagged. I think we expected it for Winfield, but Duggar getting the franchise tag was a little bit shocking, right? Like that's interesting to me that happened. I like it from a safety value perspective, right? It shows that teams are valuing these players. But it was a little bit like running back where there were a bunch of guys that did get let go, and it's kind of just a reshuffling.
Yeah, and I think what also kind of mirrors the running back situation is that this draft class is not particularly strong or expected to be strong at safety. So it might be one of those deals where if you got a pretty decent one, you're going to hold on to him, or if you're not in love with yours, you let him go and you're bringing back or you're bringing in someone that perhaps you're not in love with either, but you need the certainty heading into a weak rookie draft class. And so, like you said, it ends up in just a shuffling of the deck here, of the deck chair. So yeah, the notable moves, really, I like the Jordan Whitehead move. I want to highlight that one going back to Tampa Bay because, well, now he's reunited with Antoine Winfield Jr. His best season was alongside him in Tampa Bay in 2021. Now they're both back under Todd Bowles. Jordan Whitehead is in his prime at age 27. It's a great safety tandem. So again, just he's back into that same environment that allowed for his best seasons as a pro. So again, in his prime again, we just talked about safety not being terribly strong in the league or in the upcoming draft class. So someone like Jordan Whitehead could be an every week starter for you, especially if he's in a good environment like Tampa that he is now. So I got big stock up for Jordan Whitehead.
Good call out. I think Geno Stone is the other one people are going to be interested in, where he goes from Baltimore to the Bengals, again, interconference, interdivision. People are going to be interested in that. I think it's probably a worse situation. The Bengals defense is not the Ravens. And also he was playing next to Kyle Hamilton, which is maybe the best safety in the NFL right now. But it's still a good situation. So it's not like his stock goes way down. But it's definitely good for the Bengals as well. I wanted to just exit with a couple things, right? So Chase Young and Hollywood Brown are probably the two players that I'm most interested in seeing where they go to next. I would love to see Hollywood in Kansas City. They haven't really made any splashes. I think that's one that if Hollywood's value really is plummeting, maybe he takes a one-year flyer with Patrick Mahomes to get his stock up to get his big deal next year. Could happen, probably won't, but that's something I'd like to see. And then Chase Young.
More drops in Kansas City. That's exactly what we need. Continue.
Chase Young, I'm excited to see where he goes, right? We talked about it. I kind of was a Chase Young hater. I know you're a little higher on him than I am. Where would you like to see him go?
The problem is, I think there are a lot more people around the league who side with you than side with me on that. Not necessarily all for just on-field reasons. So this might end up being just like a perpetual Jadeveon Clowney situation where he's just signing a bunch of prove-it deals. And when it comes to that, it's really just more so who gives you the most money and then how motivated are you in a contract year, so to speak, to make it happen. So I don't have much there other than seems like not a lot of people are willing to actually take a bite at that apple. So even before signing anywhere, I got stock down on Chase Young.
So he's a Brown. Got it. Then,
Cool.
if you were to take a team, we talked about the Panthers, so I'll just start it there. If I was to say that there was a winner, I think it is the Panthers because they did follow your strategy, like basically to a T. And I think they did exactly what, if there was two strategies that I think were winning, mine and yours, I thought they were both good in their own right. But I think yours, they actually did it, right? Like they actually did it. I think it was smart. They added a ton of talent to the offensive line. They made everything on that offense 10 times better by shoring up that offensive line and getting draft picks to continue to make the offense better. So I'm actually stock up on the Panthers, even though, don't really know what to expect of this coaching, but that's not from free agency. So free agency wise, Panthers are my winner. Did you have anyone else as a winner?
I more so, well, they were my winner. I mean, it was my strategies. It was my winner. I had maybe not a loser. I wasn't sure how to characterize the Commanders because they signed a lot of players. The only one I really liked was Frankie Louvu. Tyler Biotish is like the Panthers. The Commanders basically like went to the store and had $200 in their pocket, and they bought 8 things that cost $20, and then one thing that cost $40. And that high priced item was Frankie Louvu, and then everything else was just kind of like stuff that you kind of need for the house, but it's not like great. You just kind of get it, and you wanted to just get as many things as you can for the money that you had. And I'm not sure how many difference makers they really had. So depending on how that impacts their flexibility moving forward, I'm not sure I really love what they did. They got a lot of 5 out of 10 players for more than 5 out of 10 money because that's just the nature of free agency. And that could impact your team building moving forward and have a negative impact, especially if you're bringing in a young quarterback. How much is that really going to help him in the next, in 2024, 25, and 26? I'm not sure just yet. I don't like the start. So I'm just taking a different path here, and maybe they're not a loser because they did get better because they brought in some players. I'm just not sure it was the optimal allocation of resources.
It's a strategy, right? We've talked about this in multiple years now that there are teams that do this, right? The Patriots did it a few years ago when they drafted Mac Jones. The Jags did it a few years ago when they drafted Trevor Lawrence. Like when you don't have a great team and you're in a position where you need to draft a starting quarterback, you add surplus value any way you can, right? So what these teams have done is they just raise the floor as much as possible without committing long-term resources to players like that aren't going to be there long-term, right? So it's how can I build the floor where the quarterback that I'm drafting doesn't fall flat on his face, right? The opposite of what the Panthers did last year. I kind of understand the strategy from why they're doing it, but I agree with you. It's not necessarily the best strategy, right? Like you can spend $100 on two $40 players and one $20 player instead of a bunch of $5 players, right? And that's kind of what they did. I'd put it that way. I'd say it was $5 players, not even $20 players.
But it's probably more fair. I mean, they took the worst Cowboys offensive lineman and then a bunch of backups from the defense that got shredded and said, "Here you go, welcome in, guys. We're gonna run it. We're gonna run it with this." And there were better ways to go about it.
I think there were 2 clear losers in free agency so far. I don't personally think the Giants were losers, but I think that Giants fans are not happy with losing Saquon Barkley, replacing him with Singletary, and adding Drew Lock to the quarterback competition, right? I'm a Lock guy. I think that's okay, right? If you're going to keep Daniel Jones and you need to add competition for him, Drew Lock is fine for that. Devin Singletary, if you actually look at the numbers, has been just as productive as Saquon, although obviously the situation that Singletary was in was so much better. But they've done really not all that much on the offensive line besides the one signing for a guy to compete at tackle. And then they paid a guard a lot of money who wasn't extremely productive on one of the best offensive line raising teams in the NFL with the Packers, right? So their offensive line investments have been kind of strange. The quarterback, running back investments, kind of strange. Obviously, they're committing to rebuilding their defense and making that their strength. But they need to do more. I think teams expected them to do more. Their fans expected them to do more. Again, I don't think they're a loser. I think it's a decent approach considering that they have a draft pick where they could add a Malik Neighbors and raise the floor that way. But my clear loser were the Dolphins. to lose Christian Wilkins, Robert Hunt, Xavier Howard, Jerome Baker, Emmanuel Ogbah, Andrew Van Ginkel, and Brandon Jones, and your only adds are Shaq Barrett and Jonnu Smith when your offensive line was already a weakness is terrifying.
Yeah,
right?
It's pretty bad.
And on top of that, they now are committed to Bradley Chubb and the other edge player, it's blanking.
Jaylon Phillips, who's got an Achilles injury, right? That's
Achilles
he ain't
injury.
the same.
Right. So their investments are to these players that are really not these high earner or high producing players, right? But they let Christian Wilkins go and Robert Hunt. Like, that's just bad process, right? That's just really, really bad process. And again, the offensive line losing Robert Hunt is massive. We don't know what's happening with Connor Williams yet, I don't believe, but they haven't re-signed him. So right now they're down a center and a guard, and it was already a weak offensive line. So I don't know how you fix that in one draft. I don't know how you fix that with leftover free agents. But to me, the Dolphins went from, just losing their first game in the playoffs to probably not making the playoffs.
The moment Jaylon Phillips went down with an injury this past season, their window closed for 2024. Just point blank, period, regardless of whatever else they did, because he's not going to be the same guy this upcoming season. By the time you have him back, the whole situation has changed. It's very unfortunate, but you're right. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm declaring it. This could be clipped in 12 months, and I look ridiculous, but I highly doubt it. I think their window closed. It could open back up again in another year. It's closed right now.
Yeah, so like from my perspective, it's a great offensive line draft. You might be able to replace Robert Hunt, maybe. He's, again, a top earner because he is so talented, right? So like if you're replacing him, it really needs to be Jackson Powers Johnson or one of those top offensive linemen at the interior position. And they don't pick until the 20s. So that's difficult to do. Those guys might not be there. Even if they are, how do you replace Christian Wilkins now? How do you replace Xavier Howard? How do you replace the depth that you had at edge rusher, right? You can't, right? Like it's almost impossible. It's almost like they're running a fool's errand right now, trying to just keep this thing competitive. I also think the ads were weird, right? Like Shaq Barrett and Jonnu Smith, that is not what you need to be doing with your money, right? If you told me you could have Shaq Barrett and Jonnu Smith or Robert Hunt, give me Robert Hunt 10 times out of 10, right? Just a weird allocation of assets. It's been like that the last few years. The only, I guess, good thing is they still have their first round pick this year. So we'll see what they end up doing.
Yeah, I feel like that plagues a lot of the Shanahan tree. It's like you see the coaching ability, and then there's just these weird personnel moves that hold him back. Like Shanahan's always got this quarterback he's trying to drag to the highest levels of football. And there's always something. It's always something. It's just always something. And it's a shame because it's a fun team to watch, and they're going to be a fun team to watch. But there are now fatal flaws on that defensive side, and the holes that they have cannot be fixed in one offseason anymore.
Exactly. But that's all I got for today. I think that was a pretty good episode. We got through every position in under an hour. So that takes a little bit of talent, maybe. Maybe we're getting there. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you haven't yet, please give us a follow on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok at all22_PFF, and give us a review wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts. And thanks for tuning in.
Go.